A key starter on the defense appears to be on the verge of missing week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, follow us on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. He is David Harrison at DHarrison82. We are your credentialed members of the media covering the Tampa Bay Bucs. You can check out my work as the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. David is over at BucsGameDay.com, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we are here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, we want to share our appreciation for your continued support of the show.
And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. On today's episode of Locked On Bucs, James is going to give his predictions for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers initial 53-man roster ahead of Tuesday's 4 p.m. Eastern time deadline. But first, there's unfortunately some bad news that we got to talk about, James. Well, some more bad news on the injury front. As you may have heard, safety Antoine Winfield Jr. has not been practicing over the last couple of weeks with the Buccaneers. And while it's not official yet, it's not looking very positive that Antoine Winfield Jr. is going to be ready for week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Todd Bowles is hopeful that Winfield, along with Calijah, Cancey, along with Sirvocea, Dennis, and again, thoughts out to all the Pittsburgh rookies because none of them can stay healthy this preseason. Todd Bowles is hopeful that all of them can be ready for week 1, saying recently, quote, Winfield, Calijah, Sirvocea, hopefully they make progress by the end of the week. We'll see how they go going into the game week right now, but we're hopeful that they can be ready. If Winfield can't go, that loss is going to be much, much bigger than if Calijah, Cancey can't go or Sirvocea, Dennis can't go, because we've talked about this during the offseason. Every dayers, you already know the depth at the defensive back in the defense back group, the safety position specifically, a little bit less or a little bit thinner than what we're talking about with the other two positions. I mean, Sirvocea, Dennis is depth, right? So the starters are there. You'd much rather lose depth than lose the starters. But James, what do you think about the way things are going right now with Winfield and him trending towards being ready with that right leg injury?
Yeah, it's concerning. I think that's the best way to put it. It's incredibly concerning because we've talked about the depth in the secondary, the depth on the defensive side of the ball, and you already have part of your depth at safety as your starting nickel corner. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But now if you lose Antoine Winfield Jr., that gives you 2 safeties, essentially, for the whole game. If somebody else goes down, now you're in a whole heap of trouble. And we know what Antoine brings to this team. We know what Antoine brings to this defense. He's not a guy that you can just plug somebody out there and he's going to be able to do the same things. And obviously, he's going to bring more than Calijah, Cancey. He's going to bring more than Sirvocea, Dennis. And you're losing that leadership. You're losing that captain, or should be captain, on the back end of your defense against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So this is all piling up to be very, very bad news if Antoine Winfield can't go. Again, it's not for sure. It's not set in stone, but as my dad always said, you can hope in one hand and you know what in the other, see which one fills up first. So Todd Bowles saying hopefully they're going to be ready isn't really filling me with a lot of confidence that Antoine Winfield Jr. is going to be ready to roll in Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of last year, right? We had some conversations last year about hoping for things and hoping for this to happen, hoping for that to happen. And hope is never something when you're talking about performance-based businesses, win or lose, like there really is no in between. Hoping is never going to be a way that you are going to make your money and be successful. So hopefully the Buccaneers can move past hoping for these players to be ready and get them ready for week 1 against Minnesota as much as they can, right? Obviously, physical ailments, there's only so much you can do, and they have all the treatment options in the world and everything like that. But you kind of mentioned it, right? Antoine Winfield Jr., I mean, we'll see what happens this season, but maybe he's not going to have that C on his chest. But we've also talked about this before, that everydayers remember, you don't have to be in that leadership role. You don't have to have a captain's patch on your shoulder to be a leader. And I'll turn back to Coach Robert Saleh of the New York Jets. And if you've been watching Hard Knocks, you'll get the reference. If you haven't, I'll do my best to explain it because I can't quote it word for word. But he basically, on the most recent episode where the Buccaneers were at joint practice, so there's a good chance that you've seen Hard Knocks if you're a Bucs fan because of that reason. He went through, 4 different levels of competitors, right? And one of them, the top level was commander. The level behind that, or right below that, was contender, competitor. I can't remember. There was competitor, contender. Can't remember which one was which. But basically, one of those, the second best, right, was the guy who comes out, makes a difference, gives 110%. He can't be motivated to do better because he's already giving everything he's got every single day. That's been Antoine Winfield Jr. since he joined the NFL, since he joined the Buccaneers roster. That's been Antoine Winfield Jr. is that guy that you can lean on and say, we know we're going to get the best of Antoine every single play, every single game, whether it's practice, on the road, playoffs, regular season, doesn't matter. He's going to give us 110%. But then you take that step up towards being a commander where not only are you doing that, but you're inspiring the guys around you to do that and to be better players. And I think Antoine Winfield Jr., in the midst of all the struggles we saw last year, I think Antoine Winfield Jr. took his first steps into that territory of that kind of a player for this Buccaneers defense. Again, whether it results in him wearing a captain's patch or not, to me is irrelevant because we notice when Antoine Winfield Jr. is playing well, when he's getting tackles in the backfield, when he's getting sacks, PBUs, interceptions, whatever it is, the entire rest of the defense also starts playing better. And he's not alone. Levante David is one of those guys. Devin White, for all of his Instagram drama, is one of those guys. There are plenty of guys on this defense specifically, but Antoine Winfield Jr. is certainly one of those guys, and not having him there in the defensive backfield is going to hurt if he can't go.
And I will say this, it's the bad news with Antoine Winfield Jr. It's bad news with Cancey. That's been going on for a little while. It's bad news with Sirvocea Dennis if these guys can't go. But let's try to move things over to a little bit more positive on the injury front, where we know that Mike Evans now has been dealing with a groin injury for the past couple of weeks, but he seems like he's going to be good to go and ready to roll in week 1. So you don't have to worry about Mike Evans being out on top of Antoine, on top of Calijah and Sirvocea, and of course Ryan Jensen. But we can't bring him up every single time we bring up injuries. The guy's going to be on the IR. He's done for the year. But you don't want your season to start out this way. I guess if you have to choose when you're going to go through injuries, you want that to be in the early part of the year so you're healthy down the stretch. But losing, as we've now discussed, losing Antoine is going to be a major factor for this football team. And it really boils down to how long is he going to be out? How long can the Buccaneers tread water without him on the back end of the defense? But it's that double-edged sword where, we don't know what the injury is. We know that he's had his right leg kind of wrapped up for a couple of weeks. If it's that soft tissue injury type stuff, you don't want him coming back too soon either, because then it can exacerbate the injury. Then he's out even longer, and that causes even more problems. So you just hope that whatever it is, he's fully recovered, and at the absolute most, he only misses the Vikings game.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Look, there could be some trickeration happening here, right? NFL coaches are known for coach speak and known for misdirection, and maybe he's perfectly on the track to be healthy, and they just don't want the Minnesota Vikings to know about it. Make him prepare for life without Antoine and life with Antoine. Make them spread their resources just a little bit. But we talked enough about guys who may or may not be on the field. Now let's talk about the team that is going to be on the field when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers start their season. I gave my 53-man projection on Monday's episode. So now, James, it's your turn to tell us who's going to make the roster. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you're going to have. I just landed some club-level seats for my son and I to go see the Tampa Bay Lightning take on the Columbus Blue Jackets in Columbus in November, and those tickets were easily, not kidding, one of the best deals I have ever found on not just Lightning tickets, but any tickets at all. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticket app in the country for a reason. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, and you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use Locked On NFL as your code for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
Thanks again for making Locked On Bucs first listen or your first view today and every day. Every day, appreciate you coming through like you always do. Make sure you come back tomorrow as well. Evan Klosky of WTSP 10 Tampa Bay will be back with James to react to all of the official roster news for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, discuss all the surprises that happened, including the apparent release of David Moore. But I don't want to talk about that right now. We'll talk about it later. James.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about before this, actually. So I looked up, I talked to my audience on my solo, and then officially, no moves have been made yet by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as of Sunday night. As of Monday night, still no moves have been made. So technically, my 53 is still intact, guys. I don't want to hear it. My 53 is still intact. All those reports are going to happen, though. Those will become official. Anyway, I got to talk about my roster projection on Monday's episode. We're probably not going to agree on everything. In fact, I know we're not going to agree on everything. So, James, I'm going to turn over the floor to you. Go ahead and tell us who you have making it on the offensive side, and I will tell you briefly what I think about what you have to say.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. So I did my 53-man prediction, whatever you want to call it. Then all the news starts trickling out about who's going to get cut, who's reportedly getting cut, all this stuff. I'm not changing it. So you guys are going to see exactly where I was wrong if all of these reports come to fruition. So at quarterback, I have Baker Mayfield backed up by Kyle Trask. Boom, done. Running back, I got Rachaad White, Sean Tucker, Chase Edmonds, and Ke'Shawn Vaughn. Ke'Shawn Vaughn, you guys, for those of you that were in the live on Saturday night immediately following the game against the Ravens, you saw me talk about Ke'Shawn Vaughn. I've been as hard, if not harder, on him than anybody else that has been talking about this team. And I said on that show, I think Ke'Shawn Vaughn sticks around. He was slotted in as the RB2. He was getting work in tandem with Rachaad White. After Rachaad left the game, he was getting the bulk of the carries as the RB1 after all the backups went in. And talked about what Dave Canales sees in Ke'Shawn Vaughn and that he struggled in the preseason. He looked a lot better against the Ravens, but he struggled. But we've seen what he can do in the regular season. Dave Canales wants these guys that can run, that can block, that can catch, that can make plays. And I think Ke'Shawn Vaughn finds his way onto this roster. At wide receiver, I got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. David Moore was slotted in as my slot receiver. And then Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, and Raheem Jarrett. Something else that I talked to you all about Saturday night if you were in the live stream. I think it's going to be wide receiver 3 by committee, right? And in my mind, I justified this as David Moore pretty much knows the scheme, the system. You have Trey Palmer, what he can bring. You have Devin Tompkins, what he can bring. You have Raheem Jarrett, what he can bring. But you want the veteran presence out there early in the season. Slowly work some of these guys in against these starting defenses. I thought David Moore, he's going to be the guy that's going to start things off as wide receiver 3, but everyone else was going to get a lot of time. Guess I'm going to be wrong there. Tight end, I got Cade Otton, David Wells, Keith Payne Durham. And along the offensive line, Tristan Wirfs, Matt Filer, Robert Hainsey, Cody Mauch, Luke Gedeke, Nick Leverett, Justin School, Brandon Walton, and Aaron Stinney. And that is my Buccaneers offense.
All right. So for anybody who had Ke'Shawn Vaughn making James Yarcho's 53-man roster projection and not making my 53-man roster projection on their bingo cards, I think you just got bingo. I think that by itself is bingo. But listen, David Moore, you mentioned David Moore, and yeah, we've kind of talked about this, right? We kind of honed in on Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins as like the not wide receiver 3 by committee deal, but David Moore is certainly part of that. May still be a part of that. So, we got to talk about something that Greg Allman out of Fox Sports tweeted on Monday night as part of that whole discussion. But before we do that, James, let's get to your defense.
All right, yeah, defense along the line. I got Vita Vea, Calijah Cancey, Logan Hall, William Golston, Greg Gaines, Pat O'Connor. I'm going to miss you. David's not. I will. Outside linebacker.
I had Pat O'Connor on my 53. First of all,
I know. I know you did.
Mr. Rude Beard.
Did you call me Rude Beard?
I did.
Yeah, I know you had him on your roster, but David is to Pat O'Connor what James is to Ke'Shawn Vaughn. I think that's fair to say, is it not?
I think you're thinking of Anthony Nelson, actually.
Oh, maybe I am. I am thinking of Anthony Nelson. My apologies. My apologies, David. I'm very sorry. I'm very wrong. Yes, I was thinking of Anthony Nelson. Speaking of Anthony Nelson, at outside linebacker, I have Shaquille Barrett, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, Yaya Diaby, and Cam Gill. I think Cam Gill showed enough during preseason, during training camp, that he is going to get on this initial 53-man roster. And we've been talking about Joe Tryon-Shoyinka needs to step it up and needs to be able to finish plays. David, we just said it. Not an Anthony Nelson guy. Yaya Diaby, he's a rookie. He's still going to be learning and going through some growing pains. They need all the pass rush they can get. Not only that, Cam Gill can help out on special teams as well. At inside linebacker, I got Levante David, Devin White, Sirvocea Dennis, KJ Britt. Corner, Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, D. Delaney, Zion McCollum, and Josh Hayes. They drafted Josh Hayes for a reason. I think they're going to keep him on this roster. He and Zion are going to continue to grow and learn together, continue to push each other, and again, can contribute on special teams. I think Josh Hayes finds himself on the initial 53-man. And finally, at safety, we have Antoine Winfield Jr., Ryan Neal, starting nickel corner, Christian Izien, and Kayvon Merriweather.
Yeah, so that's James's 53-man roster projection. Obviously, I don't agree with all of it. We're going to discuss some of it. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. James Yarcho, David Harrison, and David and I don't see eye to eye on most anything, but we don't see eye to eye on how this roster is going to end up being constructed. But before we get to the differences, David, let's wrap things up real quick with the rest of my 53-man roster and the practice squad. We definitely see eye to eye on the specialists. Kicker, Chase McLaughlin, punter, Jake Marta, long snapper, Zach Triner. And then on my practice squad, I have linebacker Marquise Watts, linebacker J.J. Russell, linebacker Jose Ramirez, running back Patrick Laird, wide receivers Kalen Geiger and Cade Warner, offensive linemen John Molshon, Michael Neese, Raekwon O'Neal, cornerbacks Keenan Isaac, Anthony Chelsea, safety Kendrick Whitehead, defensive lineman Deidrin Sanat and Mike Green, and quarterback John Wolford.
Yeah, so interesting stuff there. 53-man roster projections are always very interesting. And then they're like mock drafts, except usually you get more of the 53-man roster correct because, let's be honest, you kind of have almost a 22-man head start. Well, really a 25-man head start. Most teams, I think your starters are kind of solidified. And even if there's a surprise, I don't know, maybe you had this left guard starting, he's actually the backup. He's still on the roster, even if you projected him as the starter. So let's look at some of these differences here. So James, you laid out your 53. Yesterday, I laid out my 53. So if you didn't catch my 53 yesterday, you can go ahead and do that. But we'll talk about just some of our differences that we had here on our respective roster projections. And let's start with the offensive side of the ball because this is where you have a lot of explaining to do. And that is Ke'Shawn Vaughn on your 53, not on my 53, which is, I expected this to be something that we had in common. And here's what I'll say about it before I let you further justify your lunacy. Ke'Shawn Vaughn, 85, and I want to make this clear. I don't dislike Ke'Shawn Vaughn. Okay, I was really excited when he got drafted. Had his running back coach on the show to talk about all the great things he's done. I've been hoping that we would see even more. But honestly, this preseason we've seen less than we've ever seen before. 85 running backs in the NFL this preseason had 13 or more carries. Of the 85 running backs, James, take a guess of where Ke'Shawn Vaughn finished in yards per carry.
84.
85th.
Oh, so close.
85th of 85. Ke'Shawn Vaughn has 1.1 yards more per carry than I do this preseason. Okay. And couple that, you talk about Dave Canales liking running backs that can run the ball. 1.1 yards per carry is not really proving that. Can catch the ball. Okay. Can block. Ke'Shawn Vaughn has the fewest receptions and fewest receiving yards this preseason of any preseason in his NFL career. Remember, Dave Canales did not draft Ke'Shawn Vaughn. Dave Canales has not been here with Ke'Shawn Vaughn, so this is all Dave Canales has. Now, listen, I'm not saying that this is a slam dunk. He's going to get cut, but for all of the mess that you were making about Ke'Shawn Vaughn leading up to this couple of episodes, how do you look at those numbers and justify being Harvey Dent?
Because I think this is a situation where I'm going to steal a phrase from another beloved Tampa Bay franchise and their head coach, John Cooper: process over outcome. And I know I've been kind of pounding the table that Ke'Shawn Vaughn should be and will be cut. And I fully backtracked on that on the live episode because of all of the glowing things that Dave Canales has been saying about Ke'Shawn Vaughn and the system that they're in. And again, I go back to what have we seen Ke'Shawn Vaughn do versus what he was doing behind this hodgepodge mixture of an offensive line. And when he was out there with the starting offensive line, he actually started to put up decent numbers again. So I realize how hard I've been on him, and as shocked as it made me, I do think that Dave Canales wants to keep him around, especially when you have Rachaad White. It's his first year as the RB1. You have Chase Edmonds, who's not exactly the benchmark of healthy running back. You have Sean Tucker, who's coming off of an injury during the pre-draft process and then got injured again in the preseason game, though, it was just a cramp, but still, this is a guy that went down and all of a sudden everyone was thinking, oh boy, here we go. I think it's that safety net. It's that reliability that they need, that last body, and they don't want to rely on the practice squad to find it.
So when I almost put Ke'Shawn Vaughn on my 53-man roster projections for those exact reasons, Chase Edmonds has an injury history. He's injured. I say injured right now, but he's banged up right now. And then Sean Tucker is an unproven commodity at best. Even though he had a really strong preseason, Ke'Shawn Vaughn brings something that Sean Tucker just can't bring, and that is experience, right? So receivers, we kind of already talked about David Moore, Trey Palmer, and the wide receiver 3 situation. Obviously, that's more of a semantics thing. We both had David Moore on our 53. I had Trey Palmer listed as the number 3. You had David Moore listed as the number 3. Greg Allman of Fox Sports tweeting out Monday night that it's possible that the Buccaneers are releasing David Moore so that his veteran guarantee does not come active at the start of week 1. They bring him back, and now his contract actually isn't completely guaranteed, and it's just basically creative bookkeeping, which, look, you can feel bad for David Moore. David Moore probably, if this is what's happening, he's on the same page, and it's either, and basically in his world, it's essentially play for the Buccaneers in this situation or don't play at all. Now, the last thing on the offense that we need to talk about, James, I have 10 offensive linemen. You have 9 offensive linemen, especially considering the injury situation that this team has gone through on the offensive line. Count it this year, right? Ryan Jensen going on IR before the year even gets started for a second season in a row. Why are you comfortable with 9 offensive linemen?
I kept one extra running back than you did. I had to find a roster spot somewhere. The 4 that I have are guys that can play multiple positions, so they continue to have depth. And then if you take a look at your practice squad versus my practice squad, you kept 2 offensive linemen. I kept 3 offensive linemen. So we essentially, when you put the 2 together, we kept the same amount. I just have 1 fewer on the active roster because of the addition of Ke'Shawn Vaughn. It is really all it boils down to.
Yeah, and versatility on the offensive line, of course, is incredibly important. Cam Gill on the defensive side of the ball makes James's roster, did not make my 53-man projection. But I agree with everything James said. If you have the roster spot, I think he's done a good amount. I've always kind of liked Cam Gill as a depth player, and he does bring that special teams versatility. I have JJ Russell on my roster mainly because of that special teams contribution. So really, you kind of can go either way. James put JJ on the practice squad. I put Cam on the practice squad. So, I mean, really, it's either way. I think Josh Hayes versus Keenan Isaac, you're talking draft pick versus non-draft pick. You're talking potential. And this is where you kind of just mentioned in the building, right? Like I went Keenan Isaac because I'm like, Keenan Isaac to me had the better preseason. That's really all I had to go off of. But the coaches have the meetings to go off of. They have the initial observations, the initial analysis to go off of. And if Josh Hayes wins, it's going to be because of that. And then I added Nolan Turner to my safety group. James did not. Didn't Nolan Turner go to Illinois? Or was that? Was he Syracuse? Was he a Syracuse guy? He wore an orange uniform. I did this during the draft process too. I kept calling Illinois guys Syracuse guys and Syracuse guys Illinois guys. But Nolan Turner, yeah, I mean, really, again, it's just looking at the back end of the defensive depth chart and with the injury and situation with Antoine Winfield Jr. I kept 5 safeties. You kept 4, mainly because of the injury security. And look, it's possible that, I don't know, maybe a Cam Gill goes to the practice squad initially, Nolan Turner stays on, and then when Antoine's healthy, you see it revert back to the way it was. The thing is completely fluid. This is why it's the initial 53, not the final 53.
We're both wrong. Nolan Turner went to Clemson.
I said orange. It was an orange something.
Orange,
okay?
but
I just remember watching orange something in his tape. You know which tape I watched during college season? Like it's ridiculous. So I knew he wore orange something.
Yeah. And I realized that I joked, that you and I aren't going to see eye to eye on this, and we don't see eye to eye on a lot. But really, when you take a look at the way we constructed these two teams, including the practice squad, we pretty much saw this thing with the same guys in mind. We just had a different approach to how they're going to run their practice squad versus how they're going to run their active initial 53-man. But yeah, going through all this, it just kind of reminds you of the same advantages and disadvantages that we've talked about all offseason long. The lack of depth at safety and corner and edge rusher. But then you take a look at the wide receivers and you're like, they got Palmer, they got Tompkins, they got Rakeem to go along with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And something that Greg Allman pointed out on Twitter is that if David Moore was on the roster for week 1, his salary's, fully guaranteed. So this may be a situation where they're still able to bring him back after week 1. And now all of a sudden, everything's good. Everything's gravy. The Bucs are carrying 6 wide receivers. Looks like they're going to go ahead and carry 5 instead. I don't know. But you start to take a look at the way the offensive line takes shape and all the versatility there, to have that depth in a bevy of different options. If someone, hopefully not, but if someone were to go down. So I know I've said it a lot, David. I know you've said it quite a bit. This team's going to surprise some people. And we're starting to see that all come to fruition now, but they're certainly not going to be the team that's in contention for a top 5 draft pick the way that they're projected to right now.
No. And we'll do, we've already done a roster projection. We'll do another roster projection now that we've actually seen this team a little bit, seen Dave Canales, seen the defense a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee a playoff spot, but I'm thinking, honestly, on the floor, I'm thinking you're talking like 11th, 12th pick of the draft is the floor. Like that's worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is, knock on wood, massive amounts of injury, but with the roster as is, even without Ryan Jensen, even if Antoine can't play week 1, maybe week 2, I still think the floor, you're looking at like the 11th, 12th pick, which is 7 or 8 wins in this season.
Yeah. All right. With that, we are going to bid you all a fair adieu. Don't forget, coming up tomorrow, I got Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay for a WTSP Wednesday. We're going to get his reaction to some of the surprise moves for the 53-man roster. And of course, plenty to talk about as preseason is over and it is time to start looking ahead to the start of the NFL season. In the meantime, if you have questions, thoughts, reactions, comments, anything at all, of course, you can leave those in the YouTube comment section, or you can email us at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com. DM us on Twitter at LockedOnBucs. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Check out everything David's doing over at BucsGameDay.com. Check out my work over at BucsNation.com. Follow everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.